Welcome to Faux News. I'm your host, Bo Hughes. Today is a sequel to the Epstein Brief. We're going to do a deep dive on Steve Bannon and ask three important questions. Is he intelligence? Was there something to Russiagate? And is he the holy grail of ever getting to the bottom of the Epstein saga? Everything contained herein is merely a collection of data points, and the viewer is open to drawing their own conclusions.
Trump's choice for chief strategist Steve Bannon was the executive chairman of Breitbart News, a former naval officer and investment banker. Turns out, Bannon also has ties to Arizona. He was part of the Biosphere 2 team in the early 90s.
So as we ask these three questions about Steve Bannon, I want to take the last one, his ties to the Epstein saga, and work backward from there. Steve Bannon is someone that I was aware of. I knew, I had a general idea of who he was, that he was Trump's chief strategist, that he had done prison time ostensibly for a law affair by the Democrats, things of that nature, and that he was known as the whisperer of MAGA. Then in these last month or so, when these Epstein email revelations came out, that lo and behold, Steve Bannon was corresponding with Epstein very extensively right up until when he was taken into custody in 2019, and in fact was in the process of perhaps doing a documentary on Epstein to try and rehabilitate his public image. That obviously raised a lot of questions. Okay, who actually are we dealing with here? So that's when alarm bells initially started to go off, and I know I'm far from the only one. So that's data point number one. Very strong ties to Epstein, literally communicating with him up until the point at which he's taken into custody in 2019. He has hours and hours of interview footage with Epstein that he has never released to the public. He didn't even tell the public he was in possession of. It came out not through him, but through the release of these emails. And simultaneously, he's going on stages at public events like in the summertime with Charlie Kirk, demanding the government release the Epstein files. So clearly you have someone that is double-sided here and seems to have a little bit of a shadow world persona, let's say. Data point number one. Okay, now let's go back through Steve Bannon's personal history. He was in the Navy for about 5 or 6 years. Part of that time was spent at the Pentagon, where he was the special assistant to the Naval Secretary of the Navy, I believe. Very high up, he rubbed shoulders with a lot of top brass at the Pentagon. While at the Pentagon, he got a master's degree in National Security Studies at Georgetown. That's data point number two. National Security Studies, master's degree from Georgetown, their foreign service school, while stationed at the Pentagon, rubbing shoulders with top brass. Number two. Number three, after getting out of the Navy, he moved into the world of high-level finance. He spent 2 years at Goldman Sachs before funding his own boutique investment bank, Bannon and Company. Now, boutique investment banks, it's interesting. If you go on Wikipedia, I'm not someone that's overly versed in the financial world, but, you know, they are involved in all sorts of mergers and acquisitions, restructuring, reorganization, sort of acting in a consulting capacity and advising companies on how to, maximize their function. But what's interesting is that usually they lack capacity for funding for their operations, for what they propose to do from a consultancy standpoint. So obviously that money has to come from somewhere. And it's interesting, some of the projects that were undertaken by Bannon when he was running Bannon & Co., this boutique investment bank. Some of the things that he did were he dabbled a lot in media. He produced 18 Hollywood videos, movies. One of them actually was the directorial debut of Sean Penn, another somewhat murky figure who has had a lot of, let's say, international comings and goings over the years. For an actor, as we all know, he was the one that went down and interviewed El Chapo probably about 10 years ago, and then very shortly after that, El Chapo was taken into custody. And that was in 1991. I believe the movie was called Indian Runner. I think most of the other movies that he was the executive producer on were documentaries, mostly of a political nature. In fact, he also actually got a little bit of a stake in the show Seinfeld, such that even to this day, every time Seinfeld airs, he gets a little bit of the cut. This is when flags really started going off for me about Bannon in looking at his background. Being in the Navy, at the Pentagon, master's degree from Georgetown Foreign Service School, those were all okay. Maybe we have intelligence or there's something going on here. But then when I saw that in 1993 he became the director of Biosphere 2, which is it's called a terrarium or a vivarium in Oracle, Arizona. It's about 50 miles north of Tucson. And what it was it was basically a gigantic 3-acre greenhouse, for lack of a better word, that, all glass, that was constructed to, its initial mission was to try and study the feasibility of life on other planets by having literally locking scientists into this enclosed ecosystem for 2 years to see if they could survive. It had numerous different types of ecosystems in it. It had a mini ocean, a mini rainforest, a mini desert. And the objective was to try and grow your own food, see if it's possible to do this in this enclosed ecosystem, to try and see if it's feasible to replicate that and transport that technology or know-how to potentially life on Mars or the moon or something like that. So that was its first mission objective. And it's interesting because something like that obviously would be very interesting to the CIA or defense or intelligence agencies, because they would want to make sure that such a venture was sort of under wraps, sort of like the old cliche of keep your friends close but your enemies closer. If you have a bunch of scientists out in the desert that are researching basically how to go about potentially putting a station on Mars or the moon, then you might want to keep them close and keep tabs on them. So Steve Bannon, in his role at this investment bank, again, they dabble in consulting services. He takes over as director of Biosphere 2. He's there for about 2 years. From all accounts, he was greatly despised by most of the scientific staff. A lot of that, I think, came from the fact that as soon as he got there, lo and behold, he wanted to take things in a completely different research direction, and that was not focusing on trying to replicate life on other planets, but studying climate change, how ironic, pollution, and some of these more, let's say, earthly environmental topics. So he kind of, it seems, detoured things from a sort of space environment, a space study, life on other planets type of situation, to one that was more earthbound, looking at climate change and things that we deal with directly here on Earth. As stated, he wasn't very popular there, and he left after about 2 years. He actually came back briefly. Biosphere 2 was suffering a lot of financial difficulty, and the second time when he came back, I think he also was not there very long. He was sued for sexual harassment and a number of things. It sounds like it was kind of a circus while he was there. So I think we're on data point number 3 now, and that's Biosphere 2. I would encourage anyone to look into that. As I said, when I saw that, that's when alarm bells really started going off here. Why is, and particularly, of course, now that he's in MAGA, we're very anti-climate change, and a lot of it is a hoax, or it's not nearly as big a problem as it's projected to the public to be. And then in 1995, or 1993, you're taking over this internationally renowned scientific venture and steering things in a direction to study climate change. We can all change our viewpoints. Certainly within 20 years' time, your opinions and viewpoints can change, but very interesting. So then we fast forward through the 90s, and we come to Breitbart News. Breitbart News was, of course, founded by Andrew Breitbart. He was Jewish by adoption. He was adopted when he was an infant. His father was Jewish. His mother had converted to Judaism, and he was raised Jewish. He was very proud of that, and he was very, very pro-Israel. In fact, there's a quote that he gave one time saying something to the effect of, "I'm glad that I came into journalism, into the world of journalism, so that I can use it to help Israel. I love Israel." And there's nothing wrong with any of that. It's just another interesting data point, a subset. So we're at 4. We'll just keep that at 4. And number 4 is Breitbart News. In 2012, Andrew Breitbart died suddenly. He, I believe, was out walking near his house in, I think, Los Angeles, and collapsed on the sidewalk from a heart attack or some sort of cardiac event. The way it was told to the public was he had been diagnosed with some sort of heart problem a year before. So, of course, it was said that it was totally natural causes death, and that's what it is still viewed as today by the official story. Of course, there were conspiracy theorists that said he was only 43, something seems amiss here, and that has survived to this day. I'm not going to give an opinion on that, just an interesting data point. The co-founder of Breitbart News was a childhood friend of Breitbart, Larry Solov, who was Jewish and also very pro-Israel. And in fact, Netanyahu is on the record talking about when Breitbart was first starting to take off, them taking a trip in, I believe, 2007, Larry and Andrew, to Israel, and really speaking to Israelis, meeting with Netanyahu, and things really taking off from there. I believe they met with some conservative media type of people in Israel. Long story short, that's when Breitbart really started to take off, and Netanyahu and others in Israel thought that they had a bright future and similar interests. So then in 2012, after Breitbart's death, Steve Bannon comes in, and he becomes, I believe, executive chairman was the title of Breitbart News. He starts steering things in a little bit more of an alt-right, let's say, direction, promoting nationalism and populism, sort of some of these same ideas that we see him promoting today. He does this right up until the time when he leaves to become the chief strategist for the 2016 Trump campaign. Also in 2016, it is revealed that he was at Cambridge Analytica, which was a subsidiary of a company called SLC. Both of these are British entities based in the UK. That amazingly, they even put in their official mission statement as a company is to influence elections around the world and engage in disinformation. Amazingly, they actually admit that to the public. I believe SLC has since been shut down, as has Cambridge Analytica. They've been replaced by sort of a rebranded company that I think does a lot of the same things. But the reason that they were shut down is because of, after all the Russiagate, Russia collusion and all that, during Trump's first term, that investigation brought a lot of blowback and a lot of negative press, and they needed to wind things down and close doors. Interestingly enough, on November 26th, just about 2 weeks ago here, Meta, they settled a $190 million lawsuit over this whole Cambridge Analytica scandal dating back to the time that was just being discussed in the first Trump term. The scandal was basically about Cambridge Analytica was mining Facebook data and using it to either funnel it directly to the Russians or to the data of Facebook users, either funneling that data directly to the Russians so that they could run influence campaigns to influence the 2016 election, hence the whole Russiagate, what Trump has called a hoax countless times, or they were somehow indirectly, let's say, handing it off to the Russians, but that they were aware of what they were doing. And even if Russia wasn't involved, at the very least, the bare minimum, they were illegally mining Facebook data of Facebook users and using it to send them disinformation, and also try to disincentivize them from voting in the election. And of course, they targeted the groups of people, aka your Hillary supporters and liberals, that they wanted to try and prevent from voting. They've done similar things in a lot of countries, most of them in the developing world, and they were trying to ostensibly do the same things in the U.S. during that time period. They also, I don't know if there's any accusations of illegally mining Facebook data in regard to this, but were heavily involved in the Brexit campaign and the public opinion campaign that was going on in the shadows with that to try and influence those in the UK into voting to leave the EU. That covers Cambridge Analytica and Russiagate, I believe. As we all know, there was years and years of fallout of that. That's when Steve Bannon first got a target on his back. He, I believe, was able to avoid any sort of prosecution for Russiagate, which is interesting because Michael Flynn got thrown under the bus, but it seems like Steve Bannon would have been the number one person to go after, and somehow it seems like he was able to kind of skirt around the issue. What they finally got him on was charges of money laundering and some sort of fraud in regard to this fund that was set up to build the border wall in like 2020. And they were having private people send in donations to build the border wall, and the charges were that this money wasn't being sent to build the wall, it was being used for personal enrichment, and that's what Steve Bannon was accused of and went to court for. What he finally actually did time for in a federal pen in Connecticut was for refusing to comply with a congressional subpoena in regard to the January 6th attacks and appear before Congress, for which he did 4 months' time. Okay, so we go from Cambridge Analytica then we go to Epstein. So why is someone that has been deemed the MAGA whisperer, the heartbeat of MAGA, the genius running the sort of populist initiative that is taking not just the U.S. by storm and nationalistic sentiment that's not just in the U.S., but we're seeing it in Europe with the Alternative for Germany, etc. And Steve Bannon is viewed as sort of, a big player in all of this rise of nationalism that we're seeing around the Western world. Why is someone like that rubbing such close shoulders with Epstein to the point that he has been basically hired as his PR consultant and trying to help him rehabilitate his public image as a sex criminal? Why is he spending his time doing that? And why is he supporting that? Why is he going along with that? Likewise, Epstein, outside of anyone that has looked into Epstein, it would be pretty clear, let's say, that Israel and the U.S.'s approach and policy on Israel was foremost in his brain and his most important political motive. That being said, if you take Israel off the table, no doubt Epstein, given his morality and a few other things, not to say that all Democrats are bad, but would be probably a liberal and a Democrat taking Israel off the table. So why is the heartbeat of MAGA and the new political right, the Republicans, rubbing such close shoulders and being so friendly with someone with Epstein? The other big red flag is Steve Bannon loves to talk about how much he hates the elites. You know, any billionaire, somewhat in the vein of Bernie Sanders to some degree, although he's a little bit less annoying in the way that he talks about it. But Epstein is the epitome of that. He's a billionaire, financier, playboy. You know, he's got an island. He's got a ranch in New Mexico. He flies to Paris, and, you know, he's got this most expensive townhouse in New York. And he does all this shady financial stuff with other billionaires and other elites. Why would Bannon not find this person absolutely reprehensible? Because if you listen to any interview that Bannon has given, one would think that he would have nothing to do with Epstein, and that he would be immediately tossed into the bin of these elites that Bannon loves to decry and criticize all the time. So that is a big red flag. And Bannon, in short, over the course of his career, he's really been involved heavily in media and, let's say, like media operations, i.e. what could be viewed as propaganda. That's why he's producing Hollywood movies. That's why he gets involved in Breitbart. And he's chief strategist for Trump. He's involved with Cambridge Analytica to try and influence elections. All this sort of shadow world PR, disinformation, psyop type of stuff going on. And so Epstein is just a further extension of that, trying to rehabilitate the image of someone that never did the time that they should have done for what they've already been convicted of and accused of, let alone what they, lo and behold, are going to be taken into custody for shortly after Bannon is working with him. So Bannon is an interesting figure, to say the least. I'm not going to give too much more of my personal opinion. I've just laid out the data points as I said that I would. I will just say something stinks and something seems very amiss. And it will be interesting to see if more of these Epstein documents, more of these emails, if there's more dots and things that begin to connect to draw a clearer picture of, is Steve Bannon a little bit something different than what we thought he was, which was just sort of this MAGA whisperer, populist political movement figure. Particularly in the Epstein documents, the emails that were released, I thought it was interesting how Bannon and Epstein were going back and forth about sort of PR campaigns in Europe in terms of trying to promote populism and this sort of new political movement in Europe, and Epstein saying something like, you have to spend time in Europe, you can't do it remote. But all of that is in reference to Bannon not only being involved politically in the U.S., but also wanting to sort of create this populist political movement over in Europe also. Which, you know, I guess you could be an American firster and a MAGA or whatever and be just someone political, not someone involved in intelligence, and still have a passion for wanting to foster this political spirit in Europe, which many in MAGA see as declining and in need of help. I can see that, although that's a lot of effort to put into some, another continent, that when you're saying you're an America firster, that seems to me like someone that's involved in espionage-like influence campaigns is what that seems like. All of this ties into what I said in the Epstein Brief, the prequel to this video, which is, my theory is that Epstein, as we all know, was an Israeli asset. He was working in the interests of Israel. He was, an access agent that was getting potentially compromising and blackmail type information on a lot of high-level people, and that he was using that to Israel's advantage in some capacity, whether that's simply getting finances for things, arms running, which he had a history of going back all the way to Iran-Contra, or even more shadowy types of activities we very likely will never know. but in short, a very pro-Israel access agent involved or at least immersed in the shadow intelligence world. And that he was friends with Trump for 10 years thereabouts, and he has a lot of dirt on Trump probably. And the reason that he didn't come forward with that when he was finally brought in by the authorities, despite being asked about Trump a lot, would be that Trump was being very pro-Israel in office, and that's really all Epstein cared about. That was a huge plus. As long as he was being pro-Israel, that was the big picture viewpoint, the most important issue to Epstein, and he wanted to see him stay in office, which is why he didn't squeal on him. Likewise, then you've got Bannon in all of this, which is very interesting because he sort of seems like, to me, the savant in the room that everybody thinks is kind of dumb, but lo and behold, he's the one holding the most cards in the room. And what I mean by that is that I think both he and Epstein were very happy to have Trump in office, but they both kind of viewed Trump as a useful idiot and one that could be very easily manipulated because of how everyone talks about his ego. All you got to do is stroke it, and you can get him to do just about anything. And I think both of them saw him as this useful political tool that all they had to do is do the ego stroking to steer him in the right direction, and they could get him to do what they wanted him to do. Bannon, it's going to be, I don't know that he's really made any public comments after these Epstein emails have come out. It's going to be very interesting to see if he's called before Congress again to testify in regard to that. There's a lot of things that it's going to be interesting to see what he has to say publicly about this, because I don't think he can just hide from it. All these emails, and again, correspondence going right up to the time that Epstein is taken into custody, they're huge, huge questions that need to be answered. And then also, where's all this interview footage that you supposedly recorded with Epstein, and what is in it? I think that pretty much covers everything. I might do a subsequent video on this once I get a little bit more time to talk about, think about things and connect the dots. But that's where my general line of thinking is going, and I hope this has been a good brainstorming session and gotten some people thinking, because there's definitely some interesting things to ponder over. That's all for today. Thank you for watching. As always, it's not fake news. It's faux news.